The drop in performance this league has been absurd. I decided to try this week's event, but the game is almost unplayable for me. I have 15-second long loading screens, 20 FPS in town when it used to never drop below 60, and half the mobs and textures in an instance are not loaded. How is this acceptable? Now this was an interesting post that I came across because just like this player, I personally have also experienced a significant decline in performance when playing Path of Exile. Although this has only occurred to me with the most recent performance updates, it has unfortunately also affected many other players as well. When using F1 to get the stats on the top right corner, I always see shaders being at 100% for so long on the very slow loading screens before each area change. Also, unrendered tiles are now common at the start of an area. It was not like this in the past. Every loading screen takes ages now, and this was the exact predicament that I now find myself in as well. Everybody knows that Path of Exile has always been a computationally heavy game, but it really wasn't until this most recent league during Trial of the Ancestors that many players have started to experience noticeable drops in performance. I quit this league specifically due to performance. First time that I like a league and have to quit. It's very sad. Likewise, I couldn't even farm something basic like essences in the end game due to performance. So it seems that quite a few players have started to quit the league entirely early on, simply because the performance issues have started to become unbearable. And although my performance has on average been worse than previous leagues, it did happen to be the case that my experience wasn't so bad that it became unbearable for me. In fact, for my case, it was usually in the first few minutes of launching the game that performance was at its worst, and over time it would start to stabilize a little more as I ran more maps. However, it was still the case that overall my experience with the graphical issues this league has been way worse than before. It's like this for me when the game first boots up for about 5 to 10 minutes. Then it slowly gets better, but will start to slow down on load times after a couple hours. Same issue pretty much. It's like the game isn't actually caching any textures, because every time I boot up the game, the first maps or rooms in Sanctum are missing parts and the game runs terribly for the first 10 minutes or so. Now I'm no expert in this area, but what this basically means is that for whatever reason, the Path of Exile client might no longer be saving temporary files on the in-game visual assets. And so when you go to boot up Path of Exile after having closed it since the last play session, it now has to load all of the assets again from Grinding Gear game servers instead of retrieving them locally from your own temporary files. Or in simpler terms, more load make game slow. A new issue I've had this league is when I load into a map, it will lag the Netflix or YouTube on my second monitor. I don't have the strongest rig, but never have I seen PoE lag another app for me. Now it's a regular occurrence. Something ain't right in the sauce, man. And what's crazy about this particular feedback is that I actually had an oddly similar experience to what this player described. Even though I've always known that Google Chrome eats a ton of memory on any computer, leaving it open while playing PoE had never been an issue for me in the past. However, there was one case where I just happened to be watching a YouTube video about PoE during this past league, and after seeing something I wanted to try out, I immediately launched the game without pausing the video. Now what ultimately happened is that the game would crash as soon as I entered a map and would continue to do so even after having paused the YouTube video and closing down Google Chrome. What eventually resolved this issue was a full restart of my computer and launching no other application except for Path of Exile before anything else. And the reason that I described this experience as being odd was because I wasn't able to replicate the problem again, nor was I really interested in doing so. What's a bit scary is that it's almost the end of a league and there was no performance patch. Are we going to beta test it again at league start, or are they okay with the current state of the game? And what's unfortunate is that many players already share similar concerns when it comes to server performance during a league start scenario. And although I'm sure that Grinding Gear devs have been very diligent with trying to improve server-side performance, what's concerning is that the last patch may have even introduced client-side performance problems on top of the hectic environment that a league start already is. But with the Affliction League already announced and preparations for a new league launch underway, how do players really feel about GGG handling these performance issues? It frustrates me so much that GGG's response to this has been to wait it out. I still maintain that a performance patch that decreases performance for many of the player base is one of the dumbest things I've seen in gaming. Just so we are all on the same page, PoE has been steadily increasing their minimum requirements over all these years. Performance patches are typically to address issues with recent or upcoming additions to the game and result in a net decrease in overall performance in reality. Just is what it is to keep adding various updates to the game or engine. The point being is, on the very first first release you could play on a potato, but we can expect the requirements to always trend higher. And then afterwards, this commenter also followed up with what was apparently the minimum requirements for PoE 10 years ago. I'm getting abysmal performance with my 3080 32GB RAM and a 2020 era i5. Every setting is on low, should be more than capable. So it seems that even with computer setups that are far from cheaping out on performance parts, players are still experiencing poor gaming quality when it comes to playing Path of Exile. Thankfully, there were still a handful of players willing to offer some solutions in hopes that the problem can be alleviated to some degree. I know it will sound weird, but hear me out. A few weeks back there was a similar post here, and one of the users there suggested the following: launch PoE, go to your task manager, right click the PoE process, select affinity, and disable one of the cores. Or go to the power settings and limit your CPU to 80 or 90%. It's weird because it works. The stutter might be related to CPU throttle, and limiting CPU usage seems to work. So what this player seems to be suggesting is that because configuring the lower graphical settings in the PoE client itself doesn't seem to be helpful in maintaining your computer's thermal health, manually configuring your computer to prevent PoE from overheating your system in the first place will effectively improve performance in the long run. Now that's just my best guess at explaining what he meant, but if you know a thing or two about computers, please do correct my understanding if I'm misinterpreting. It may sound odd, but turning graphic related settings to high could actually increase performance. Running anything alongside PoE that adds some GPU load should make it work better. Now I do want to mention that this particular solution didn't work for my computer specifically. I did try to test this theory before on my own computer since I was quite curious, but unfortunately to no avail. However, this user and several others did continue to elaborate on why this solution could work in some people's cases. Relieving the bottleneck on certain hardware combinations depending on the type of game and the component causing it may mitigate the effect. It stems from faulty power plants where PoE actually doesn't put enough load on the CPU to maintain max speed clocks. The real answer is putting your power plant to max performance, and then do the same thing for your GPU. Power saving is and always has been a source of many performance issues. And so essentially, if you have a fairly high-end computer rig, I believe, and haven't had any luck with turning down all of the graphical settings, you could consider trying out this solution and seeing if it helps with your computer's performance. Also, be sure to let me know if this solution has worked for you or not. Again, I'm not exactly the most well-versed in computer topics, and I'm sure many players would appreciate further insights on this particular approach as well. But aside from these solutions, I did also want to take this opportunity to talk about channel memberships. Channel memberships are the simplest way for you to support this channel while it's growing and to gain small perks along the way, such as priority reply to your comments as well as early access to my uploaded videos. You'll also be given badges next to your name so that you can show how long you have been a supporter of this channel. If you really like the videos that I've been putting out for my Reddit recap series, consider becoming a member today. A problem I've run into is the time it takes to load into people's hideouts. I've lost trades because my character is loaded in, but I'm stuck at loading screen until all the particle effects render. This is on a computer that's only a few years old at minimum graphical settings. They should at least give us an option to hide premium effects in hideouts. So this was a comment from one of my previous videos, and what's highly unfortunate about this reality is that the visual MTX sold from PoE's in-game shop does actually seem to cause rendering issues according to many players. Whenever I've entered someone's hideout and they have tons of visual effects going on, it does become noticeably slower to load into their hideout. Now, it hasn't affected me to the extent that I've lost out on any trades yet, but it does seem to be negatively impacting players' trading experience. And so while I do still love Path of Exile as a game and really do appreciate the effort that the developers put into making the game better, I do think that maybe having a setting that optimizes how these premium effects are rendered could also go a long way as well. Overall, I believe that Path of Exile has become such a complex game that asking for any performance changes could be a much higher demand than what we might make them out to be. But even though there are many glaring issues that need to be addressed in regards to performance, I do think that Path of Exile is still easily one of the best games in the ARPG category. And so that's all for this video. If you want to find out why players never interact with new league mechanics in Path of Exile, check out this next video.